I've come today with a marvellous panel to talk to you about Living Latin. If you want to tweet what we're doing, there's a hashtag there, but there's so little tweeting going on, CA16 will probably work fine. That's my Twitter name if you want to include me at all in that. So, Living Latin, and we're bringing together today theory, research and practice. We met, or four of us met, in Lexington at an event where we, for a week, a whole week, speak nothing but Latin. For me that seems unimaginable, perhaps for some of you it seems unimaginable now. I can tell you it did happen, and it was a formative experience in my view on how Latin is learned, and I would like to just share a little of that experience with you, and in the fourth session of our panel it will be as if you are transported to Lexington for 20 minutes. And you will be taught by Professor Thunberg here, who convenes that conventiculum. So you have 20 minutes of that experience. You'll be able to look at that through your own eyes, which is a marvellous experience to have, a marvellous opportunity within the United Kingdom. Okay, so we met in Lexington. We're going to take you from theory in my presentation onto what practically happens in Kentucky, onto a new implementation in Cork, and then your 20 minutes of glory when you get to participate in the Lexington experience. We're bringing these together in a way that is rare in Latin teaching, I think, but even rare in modern language teaching, to try to bring those three things, research, theory and practice, together and let them feed into each other is a rare trick. So let's hope we can pull that off this morning. I'm the theory person. This is the name of my PhD, and I'm doing research into the communicative approach in Latin through socio-cultural perspectives. I shall try not to fit the whole PhD into this session, but I looked over the fence from Latin into modern language to see what inspiration can I find in how they teach, and what inspiration can I find in the theories that over many years they have developed. Because in Latin, although we are great on practice, we tend not to have developed our own particular theories, even though Latin is a different thing that we're trying to achieve from the modern linguists. We don't seem to have developed our own particular theory. So I'm looking over the fence, what can I bring in here? This is not what drove the development of the approaches in Lexington. They've come from a different angle. But I'm going to give you my angle to look at it from today. Okay, so this is how it's going to fit together. I'm going to be talking about socio-cultural theory and what I vaguely keep under the umbrella of a communicative approach to teaching. And my three research questions I'm not going to talk about this one at all. This is a blatant advertisement for this panel here. Go along this afternoon. Not going to talk about that even slightly. This is about what are the benefits of the communicative approach. What good might it bring to our experience of teaching and learning Latin? I'm not going to talk about that either because Jason and Laura, Alma and Ashley, sorry, it's great having a difficult name, isn't it? I'm going to tell you all about that, what it's like on the ground. What I'm going to try and do is try and look at it from a theoretical perspective. There is some work going on in theory in terms of looking towards Krashen. Well, ahead of me, lots, particularly in the USA, there's a lot of looking there. And I believe that also with our Cambridge Latin course, a lot of looking towards Chomsky. But as far as I know, I haven't read yet anybody who's taken a close look at socio-cultural theory. Bart at the back of the room would be my expectation if anybody's gone into it. But I'm going to have a look at something called socio-cultural theory, which looks at language in a very particular and different way, not the input, processing, output thing, but as something where learning is situated in a social environment and takes that into account. Okay, so that's what I'm going to look at. And so we've got two environments really that we meet in Lexington. One is where we experience what's vaguely corresponds to communicative Latin teaching. It's not quite it's language teaching, it's not quite the same thing. And we also, when we're outside classes, so there are formal classes where we do learn, they're held in Latin. And there are then spaces outside that, in fact the whole space outside that, occupied with personal interaction with each other through the language of Latin. So if we went to a shop, We were allowed to talk to the shopkeeper in English, but we couldn't address each other throughout the whole of the week. So the social interaction that went on through the week was a big part of that learning experience. I'm not going to dwell on that, but I'm going to just point out, these are two approaches from modern languages. Communicative Latin teaching. There's a weak approach where you learn the language to communicate. So we'd be doing, this is how you go into a shop in France, and we would learn how to use that. What I am looking at is the strong approach to communicative language teaching, where we learn the language through using it to communicate. So if you keep that in mind, it's very like what the experience was in Lexington, where we're using the language in order to learn it. There's lots, by the way, of references here, and there's a bibliography at the end, so if you take it away, start doing your own research, I'd be delighted to have somebody to talk to. Okay, I want to just dwell for a minute on the concept of interaction, because this is very important in the way that I'm going to look at it using socio-cultural theory. Interaction is basically, it's when we, connect with each other. And a lot of our connection with each other, some of it happens through gesture and hugs and all that, but a lot of our interaction with each other does happen through language. And it can occur face to face. And just keep this in the back of your mind when you're thinking, oh, we don't need to learn to talk Latin because we don't want to read. Just keep in the back of your mind that, in fact, writing and reading is a form of displaced interaction. So if I want to, and I know it's at a distance, and I know it's very imperfect and all that, if I want to have some sort of relationship with the writers of the past and to interact with them, then there is, to an extent, a way that I do that through my reading. And that's the whole, for me, the whole purpose of my learning and being so interested in the teaching of ancient languages. Okay, interaction doesn't just happen outside. You don't just interact with other people, you also interact with yourself. And we would usually call that thinking. And sometimes one of the tools that you use to interact with yourself is language. It's not the only tool. It's things like algebra that we use all the time to interact with ourselves. But there are other things like visualization, memory, all sorts of ways that we interact with our own experience of the world. And one of the tools that we use to form that is language. I'm sure you'll have caught yourself talking to yourself, as I was this morning, come on mine, or even under your breath. But one of the ways you interact with yourself is through language. So keep that in mind. That's intrapersonal. Okay, two types of interaction. Right, theory. Let's get to my socio-cultural theory. Statements about why things happen the way they do, and let us make predictions. So in terms of the theory I'm going to look at today, hopefully will cast light on how we learn Latin, and then give us some sort of inspiration for how we teach and teach ourselves Latin. Okay, this seems to be going back a long way. 1934, this gentleman, Vygotsky, died very young, 37 I think he was, but was prolifically written before that, so that the works that he did are still being unpicked by theorists today. His theory was not a language learning theory. It wasn't even a learning theory. It was a theory of mental functioning, a theory of how humans become what a human is and how humans develop, but not only humans, how the whole of society and the whole of the world over time develops. So big, big, big idea. I'm going to be applying it just to language learning, as others have sort of brought in what special does that say to us about language. But it concerns social interaction within the context of a particular culture at a particular point in time. So as classicists, this is like coming home. This is a person that recognised the situatedness of language in a culture, in a society. So, seems a promising one. And they've got buckets full of theories, the modern linguists, right? I will tell you, buckets. And so we could spend, all of us, the rest of our lives trying to get our heads around all of them. But this, to me, seems the most natural for classicists to try and get their heads around, even though it's not immediately very intuitively obvious, some of the stuff he says. Okay, so what Vygotsky says about child development is that everything in that child's development comes to it from acting socially, from interacting socially with objects in its environment or with people in its environment. It starts off between it and people, and it is then brought into it to raise its consciousness, to make it what it is, to give it a way to be in that world that it belongs in. Take me 3.5 years to get my head anywhere near that. Let's move quickly on. What I'm going to give you now is the major concepts of socio-cultural theory. Some of them might be familiar. Scaffolding, I think, has become a term that's used very widely. But I would like you to take you very quickly, well, I hope I won't take you too quickly, through these concepts. And then I'm going to show you a learning event that I took part in, and maybe try and spot these things, spot these constructs, explaining what's happening. Now, when you come to Terence's presentation, I want you to watch there. Can I spot any of these concepts? And can I experience any of these things that you're talking to me about? Yeah? So this leads straight into Terence's demonstration of what he does. Okay, mediation. Tools let us change our world. As humans, the special thing about us is that we make tools to interact with the world. We make physical tools, and we make higher mental functioning tools as well, such as language. Okay, digging. Digging's a good skill. An animal will use the instincts it has to dig, but we as humans have developed tools, and those tools let us do much more than we could without them. And we build on them and develop them over time. Language is one of those tools. So it's a construct, it's a thing that we've made in order to interact with the world around us, and then to internalise and make our own and use to frame our thoughts. Okay, some more concepts. One of them is imitation. A lot of you will have watched how a child develops imitating the things that the parent does. Yeah, so imitation is one of the concepts that helps with the development of whatever higher level function it is you're talking about, but particularly language as well. And I'm now going to introduce scaffolding in terms of the skill here as a metaphor of riding a bike, but if you think about it in terms of either teaching language or developing language for the first time, what we've got here is I've tried to make a kind of sequence whereby we get this child is receiving a lot of help, yeah, in order to ride a bike. It can't ride a bike on its own, so it's receiving a lot of help to ride that bike. Here we've gone on to stabilisers, so it's got a slightly less help, but it can move from there to there quite comfortably. Then it's got this bike here's got no pedals, but it's running along the ground effectively, and here we're just holding on to the back, so that eventually that child has now appropriated that skill. So it couldn't ride a bike before. If we'd given it a bike, it would have hurt itself quite a lot and possibly been put off biking forever. Yeah? But by taking it through stages where it's supported and can increase its skill, then we have let it grow to the point where that becomes a skill that belongs to it, it's part of it, and eventually it becomes so good at riding that bike it doesn't even know it's doing it. You know, it's got no concept of trying to keep its balance. It's just biking, yeah? Think about that in terms of how language is learnt and how the help, in two contexts, with a child, the help is gradually withdrawn until the child is independently doing what it is that you want it to do. No, I've lost my plot a bit now. We're moving towards that appropriation, internalisation of the skill so that it becomes the property, becomes appropriated by the child. Or in teaching, so that where our students are held in the same gentle progression until they can independently function and internalise that skill of Latin comprehension, learning, speaking. Okay, last one. Sounds good, this. Zone of proximal development. All this means is that that concept of slowly withdrawing help is captured in this idea. So we've got things, let's look at it now and move towards looking at it as a Latin teacher. So we've got students and there are things they can do without help, right? So they've got a certain amount of skill that they can perform without help. They've got things here, right out in the edge, where it wouldn't matter what help we gave them, they wouldn't be able to do it. It would be too big a leap from the skills they have now to the skills, like if you put them straight onto the bike. But what we've got here is called the zone of proximal development, and in that zone, someone helps someone else to perform that skill that they couldn't otherwise do, and gradually withdraws the help that they're given, so the help gets less and less and less. You will see this with the 3 exercises when we get to Terence's presentation, that in the first exercise, give you buckets of help. Second, you're going to have to do a little bit harder things and, a little bit move back. And in the third exercise, again, you still get some help, but increasingly you're functioning independently. Okay, so the scaffolding is basically the thing that lets you function in that zone of things that you can potentially do with help, but you can't do without. Right, I'm going to take you through a learning event. This is a bit convoluted. How much time have I got? 6 minutes, about perfect. Great. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a quite convoluted learning event. And at points, I have tried to disguise the identity of the girl called Maria, who takes part in this learning event, to spare her feelings. But at points you can see in the side that things have slipped a little, and you might be able to guess who she is. So, at the conventiculum, she was talking with someone else, having a conversation, and they asked, "Quid hodie didikisti?" And she had no idea what didikisti was. Yeah? So she doesn't know what that means, and the friend thought of a way to help her, and went through disco, discre, didiki, okay? And because she already had done some learning in other methods, she'd spent quite a lot of time in grammar translation classes learning her principal parts. As soon as he said disco, discre, didiki, she thought, "Oh, God, yeah, I know what that must mean, okay. And the conversation could go on in the way that it did. So she had got now a passive learning of didikisti that she hadn't, been able to recall just hearing it in conversation. But now, oh no, I know what you mean. Okay, so let's see what happens next. This is the next day, I think. So she's now trying to engage somebody else in conversation. So Maria is actually meeting with Dominicus, and the names have been changed to protect the innocent. And so here she goes, and she's going to try and make conversation. She's saying, let's talk about and then quid dicisti sounds about right, but it's obviously a bit of a slow learner, this girl. So she hasn't remembered the third principle. It gets worse, actually. She hasn't remembered the third principal part. Okay, so Dominicus looks very puzzled at this, and he's wondering what's going on. So he's understood de conventiculo, but he hasn't understood, he definitely hasn't understood the dicisti bit. So he signals that. Now, that tells Maria that she needs to think again. Now, that is the minimalist, the smallest piece of scaffolding you can give somebody. The least level of scaffolding is a look that just says, "I think you ought to think again." So you're not telling them anything explicitly, but he's looking at her and he's saying, "I'd just like you to think again." So even though both these people are beginner speakers, Dominicus is now able, through that feedback to Mair and her speech, to tell her that she needs to think again. So good on her. She comes, didikisti. Yeah, got it. So then she said, she's trying to explain well, grammatica. Well, quid didikisti, got it. Okay, now unfortunately, it isn't really the case that Dominicus didn't recognise it because she said didikisti. He actually doesn't really recognise didikisti either. So let's see what happens next. So Maria now wants to explain it to him, and she thinks, "Oh, I'll say the principal parts. That's a good idea." But unbelievably, it's terrible listening back to the recording. I cringe. Oh, unbelievably, she cannot remember the first principal part. So Dominicus, bless him, has to come in with do, da, re, daddy. No. Dixisty, no. But now what we've got is a situation where these two are now helping each other with their language. They're both, definitely not teaching each other. They are helping each other in that constructed zone of proximal development. They've both got each other in that zone where they're giving each other minimal help because that's all they can give. But it's gonna, things are gonna come good in the end. So Maria is now in a terrible state because she's still trying to think of that word. What on earth is that? What on earth is that word for learn? So she thinks of another approach, and she goes for, I guess, their docket discipuli. And Dominicus comes up with studio. So, but they are still there scaffolding each other. And I just want to flick back actually because I wanted to point to this. We laughed, and they both laughed. And what I wanted to point out at that point was they were both very happy. They knew they were mucking it up, they knew they were getting their Latin wrong, and they were both very happy and laughing and wanting to get it right and working towards getting it right. But they were not stressed and they were not feeling any sort of tyranny or obligation to get exactly the right anything. Yeah? They were both having a good time there. I'd go back this minute if I could. Okay, so eventually, Dominicus comes up with studio, student, and then Claudius comes along and listens in, and they both together suddenly say disco. Oh, the relief. Okay, so Maria's now into disco, disco, didiki, triumphant. It's a fantastic achievement, and we hope that Maria might have appropriated this, taken it in, and she might now actually really know and be able to produce and use those principal parts of disco. Yeah, so everybody is now delighted. And we come to hopefully the happier ever after ending, where the next day someone comes along and joins in a conversation and she's able to use didicimus. Phew, look at that, yes? So hopefully now she will never forget that word. That word has become part of inside her mind, and she'll be able to recall it at will and use it and recognise it if she meets it reading. Okay, so that's how I'm looking at it. We're looking out for those ideas of the zone of proximal development, the scaffolding, the appropriation, the internalisation. Yeah, it's just about perfect. Yeah, I love it when a plan comes together. So, in the final exercise today, you're going to get 3 exercises to watch and take part in. First of them is going to be repeat after me, then there's a dictation, discussion exercise, picture storytelling. I want you to look out for doing my research for me, imitation, scaffolding, appropriation, the zone of proximal development, and internalisation. So those are the key concepts of sociocultural theory. Do try, and I know it's difficult because you'll want to be joining, I know you'll all want to be joining in and concentrating on what you're doing, but if you feel that any of that is going to stick, that would be a very interesting reflection. And if you want to write and tell me about your experience, I won't be able to keep it in the PhD this time, but I am hoping to go on with my research, and I would be very interested in your reflections on how it was for you, and whether you think that going forward any of that will become part of what's in your mind. Okay, so those are your references when you want to do it yourself research. These are quite good places to start. You're welcome to the slides, anyone is welcome to my slides. So that's about brought me to the end of what I wanted to share with you today. If you've got any questions, I'm sure I would have a bucket full of questions myself. In fact, I'd like to ask some of you to explain some of that to me. But if you've got any questions, I'd be delighted to listen and to tell you what I can.
Do you have any questions? This question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the great presentation. Is there any of this for ancient Greek as well?
Well, actually, funnily enough, when I started this PhD, it was a PhD in Latin, Ancient Greek, technology, modern language approaches, modern language theories, right? So I have done a lot of research on all those things. into the PhD, you know, you've only got a certain amount of space. I'm only putting the Latin research that I've done, and I'm actually only putting the modern language research that I've done. Loads of papers to come, obviously. But yes, everything that I've said, I would expect to apply, you know, with any language well, with any language, but particularly to ancient languages, it's very, you know, it's a particularly good fit, I believe, with ancient languages. Yeah, my Latin is, believe it or not, better than my Greek. So I focused on Latin because I would be better able to interact. There are less opportunities, I think. There isn't a direct equivalent of Greek for Lexington Greek, but there are. Go on, Terence is going to tell.
I just would like to interject to say that there are indeed. It's of course a smaller group, and it's harder to get the critical mass of people. But there are indeed seminars in spoken ancient Greek as well.
There's a university summer school, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And in the Paulus Institute, based in Jerusalem, has seminars in Rome and in America. In fact, I've been involved with trying to put one together in Lexington itself as a complement to our Latin one, but we did not get enough people this year. But hope springs eternal.
So that's a good idea for the future, isn't it?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed that too. If you accept that all languages are for communication, then does it actually have to be grammatically correct? Because in any language, when you speak to someone, if you get your past tense wrong or your number wrong, people are still understanding you. And I'm wondering if that's the same in Latin. If you perhaps don't know the principal parts of disco, does that actually matter if the person at the other end is still able to understand?
In the social situation I was in Lexington, not a bit. No. I've got some recordings of my own conversation, and some of it was shocking, as you've seen. It didn't matter in that context as long as you communicated what you want, yeah? Mm-hmm. But what does happen is that you passionately want to communicate. You know, the drive to be a social being is such that you desperately want to be able to communicate as well as you can. So that you want to improve, you watch the others intently so that you can say what you want to say. It is like being put in a foreign place. You desperately want to. So, for instance, when my iPhone didn't work, I used the word non-laborat for a bit, right? Now, laborat is the wrong concept for work, but it worked for a bit until I asked somebody. I knew laborat can't be quite, and they said fungitor, right? So, even though I was allowed to make as many mistakes, to feel comfortable, to laugh at myself, eventually I moved towards proper, correct Latin. So it was a marvellous release from when I remember as a child learning Latin, and it was terrible if you got the ending wrong. You know, it was a really terrible thing, and you had big red ink all over your paper, and you thought, oh God, I'm useless at Latin. And in fact, if you come to my presentation this afternoon, there'll be a little bit of that in it. But no, you don't. It's fantastic, the liberation of being able to just communicate and to see that Latin is a language that works.
Could I just jump in there and say that I think one of the things that really works very well in Kentucky is partly the size, but also the differentiation of so the size of the group, the differentiation in levels, so that you can hear people like Francis speaking and see what's possible, but you can hear people at a whole range of different levels where you can feel comfortable, you can learn, you can listen. It's not just people at your level, though having people at your level is really valuable, but also being able to learn through hearing correct construction, having people you can ask, and having that at a range of different levels, so that you, even if you're shy about making mistakes in front of the more accomplished speakers, you can find somebody you're comfortable to interact with and find the answer.
It is like going to a very special community, a very special culture, a very welcoming, supportive community. Yeah.
Okay.
Am I done?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you very much.